In all of the stories of alcoholism, there is one common theme. Alcoholism can strike anyone in any walk of life. And once it is recognized, it can be treated. Once again, alcoholics can say, "It's great to be alive." Glenn Jorgensen of River Park in Pierce, South Dakota, has talked with and treated thousands of victims of alcoholism. He has talked and worked with well-known and influential leaders in government, business, sports, and in the world of entertainment.
Many who are suffering the illness of alcoholism still feel the fear, disgust, and shame. They feel that their life would not be complete without alcohol. They live with the problem that they can't solve. They blame others for the problems directly caused by their own alcoholism. And often when the alcoholic is ready to do something about it, his family still denies or refuses to accept his alcoholism. Gary Moore, for many years a star of radio, television, and motion pictures, tells this story.
Do that. I can remember getting a call from a young lady. She was maybe 35 years old. And she called me up and she wanted to come around and talk to me about it because she thought perhaps she was an alcoholic. And so we discussed it, and I explained to her, I said, nobody can really tell you whether you're an alcoholic unless you say to yourself, inside, I'm an alcoholic. But anyhow, out of this discussion, she came to the conclusion that she was an alcoholic. She went home and told her mother, who I had known for years and was a very dear friend of mine, and said, Gary and I talked it over, and I am an alcoholic, and I'm going to go someplace and do something about it. Her mother called me up absolutely furious. She said, my daughter cannot be an alcoholic. She was a debutante. I said, well, you know, that doesn't cut any ice. You know, really, you can get just as drunk being a debutante as you can being anything else in the world. You know?
Alcoholism does strike a tremendously broad segment of our people. It is no respecter of position, money, power, age, or sex. In the field of government, former Congressman Wilbur Mills made this statement.
That's right. Well, I know people who have been very high in the military, Navy, Air Force, Army, who became alcoholics. I know people who've been very high in government who became alcoholics. I know people who were very important and high in business who became alcoholics. In any walk of life, it's a little hard to believe that a librarian in a law school can become an alcoholic, but I know some who did. Doctors, lawyers, just name it. I know them. Strange thing is that we found out that the highest incidences of alcoholism in industry are not among the blue-collared workers or the white-collared clerical office workers, but among the executives, the professionals, percentage-wise. You find more, and they are, of course, the people that are making the most money, who are supposed to have the highest positions, and all. It can strike anywhere, and it does.
Well, that's a barrier to recovery, the idea that he can't be an alcoholic, he's a banker, she can't be an alcoholic, she's a school teacher, he's still got his family, they still have enough money. And this, because of the image that the general public has, precludes their getting the help that they need.
I'm sure that most people think of an alcoholic as I used to think of him, the fellow who is down and out sure enough, the tramp, the hobo, the man who has no place to live, no place to eat, who bums enough each day to buy his bottle or two of wine. But that's only about 3% still of those who are addicted to alcoholism who are still drinking. Only about 3% of the people actually fit the description of an alcoholic that most of us have in our minds. Most of the people who are alcoholics still have their jobs, they have their wives, they have not been arrested, they've not been hospitalized, nothing has happened to them really, yet they are addicted to alcoholism. In time, maybe they realize it. In time, some of them do something about it.
The problem is recognition and acceptance. Understanding that alcoholism is an illness that can strike close to home. It is a problem in every community, in almost every family. In fact, if you know 7 people who drink, chances are 1 is or will become an alcoholic. And then acceptance. It's tough to accept the idea that, quote, I can't drink, I'm an alcoholic. And it's even more difficult to put it into words. Gary Moore puts it in a very humorous way as he tells his own story.
Phrase it another way, sobriety is the only war that you can win by surrendering first. You must first surrender before you can even start to win the war. And that's the toughest part in the world, is to stop and say, I am an alcoholic. And I'll never forget the first time I had to say that to a group. Hi, I'm Gary, and I am an alcoholic. I practiced it in my closet for a while. And I'd get up to the point where I'd say, hi, I'm Gary, and I'm, I drink a little. You know, and I said, no, that's unacceptable. You got to come out and say, I am an alcoholic. And once I said it and said it in front of a group, then it didn't seem to be all that terrible, you know? Because instead of having people all go, boo, hiss, rotten fella, they all said, hi, you know, welcome. And I found for the first time I wasn't the only one in the land.
Recognition and acceptance. Frequently, the people around the alcoholic recognize that he has the problem while he is still blaming other people. This is what Dick Van Dyke had to say about that in his case.
No respect of persons. Anyone can become an alcoholic. It doesn't matter whether or not he's successful. In other words, I didn't have any worries. Why did I become an alcoholic? I didn't drink because I had worries. I drank because I was an alcoholic. I drank because I drank. That's why I drank.
Because you couldn't not drink.
That's right, because I couldn't not drink. I thought that I drank because of my anxieties and my fears. And I found out that I had anxieties and fears because I drank.
I think from reading some of your experience, truly the definition that I like to use for alcoholism is that alcoholism is trouble. If you've got trouble in any area of your life and alcohol is involved, keep it simple. That's alcoholism.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Trouble career-wise, family-wise, and the drinking doesn't cause, or the trouble doesn't cause the drinking. Usually the drinking causes the trouble.
Absolutely, absolutely. I never had any troubles in my life that I can think back on now that were externally caused. I caused all my own misery.
I recently talked with Dr. Dennis Waitley and with former South Dakota Governor Joe Foss. In both of these conversations, we discussed the problem of recognition. Dr. Waitley is a psychologist with a most interesting background. He has worked with our astronauts in the Apollo Moonshot program, with the Salk Foundation, with the Miami Dolphins pro football team, and has talked on the subject of alcoholism before packed houses of the medical profession. An interesting and most outstanding career.
Toughest challenge of all, to accept the fact, or even to become aware in your own mind that you have a problem, and to accept the fact that you're going to do something about it. And I think creating awareness is the single most important aspect of this problem, and I think it's up to every physician in the country to start taking a hard look at the way they've been kind of sweeping it under the rug and looking at it as a stigma or something they don't want to talk about, and really making it more aware that it's something very common and much more present in many households in the country. And getting that education out, whether it's through television programs like your own or through educational literature programs, through AA, any way we can to get the problem right out on the table, that you need to be aware that you have a condition and that you need a desire for change, and that it's possible to change, and that it's not something you can't do anything about.
You've been involved in all areas of medical work. You mentioned that you'd worked lecturing to MDs, working with the Salk Foundation. Your awareness of the entire health field has to be pretty high. We frequently claim or say that alcoholism is probably the third leading illness in the country. Do you agree with that?
I agree. I think if it isn't the second, it's certainly the third. There's no question about it. I'd say that 80% of the people that come to see a physician for an anxiety or a family problem, that you could say that alcohol was in there somewhere. And it isn't always recognized, and I think there's a great education program needed just at the professional level first, but it really is a very common ailment or reason that people come, although they don't always go away with that feeling.
Awareness, recognition, acceptance, and a change in life. Change from the cruel, unhappy, troublesome life of the alcoholic to a life of accomplishment, of success, a life of fulfillment. Joe Foss needs little introduction. World War II flying ace, Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, Governor of South Dakota, Commissioner of the American Football League, and now with the Dutch KLM Airlines in Washington, D.C. In his travels, Joe stopped by River Park. We talked of many things, including the recognition factor of alcoholism.
As I've always said, where you come from that counts. It's where you're going. And of course, a lot of folks, you know, because they come from a very humble background, let that worry them. As I always say, if you crawled out from under a board, who cares? You're here. And it's, as I always say now, like I said, when you said, nice to have you here on the program, I said, it's great to be here. As I put it, it's great to be anywhere. You know, great to be alive.
That's the title, by the way, of our series.
Well,
it's great to be alive.
That, but I feel that the good Lord has a place in this earth for everyone. And he doesn't concern with what you've done in the past. He wants you to shape up from right now and get right. And so people that have in the past have had some problem or other, and let that thing worry them the remaining days of their life here on earth, just have a tough time of it. Just like I was talking to an old boy the other day who's had a problem wrestling around with alcoholism, and I said, now basically, what's your problem? He says, I have highs and I have lows, and I don't know. He says, I just keep in turmoil all of the time. And I said, well, what really is your problem? Al says, well, I tell you, I lost $1 million last year. And I said, do you have any left? And he said, yeah, I do. And I said, well, now, if you had $1 million to lose, that's great. And I can see why it would make you a little nervous in the service, especially if it were your last $1 million. But in view of the fact that you've got some more, why, I see your wife, she's right here, and she's a beautiful lady, has good health, and you have good health when you stay off the flit. So, now tell me, do you have any money left? And he said, yes, I still have $2 million left. So I said, hooray, we can win. I said, now, if money is a problem, I've never gotten that first $1 million, friend, so you're way ahead of me. And he's telling, you know, he said, you keep smiling all the time. What are you smiling about? I said, the good Lord's keeping me smiling. So just, my point is that everything is relative. And of course, if you look at what a great life it is here on earth, no matter what goes wrong, you can see something good happening. Thank the Lord for whatever it was that happened, and figure maybe that's a lesson. I got knocked down once, I can come back. I can go from here on. And if there's something that really bothers you, don't take it on yourself and think that drugs or booze or some other thing is going to help you straighten it out.
The treatment for alcoholism is one of behavioral change. We must change our lives, and we do it in many ways. It's a complex subject and involves all of our emotions, conceptions, and most of all, our feelings towards ourselves. Complex? Yes. But Whately defined it simply as acting as if.
Put it, you can't just think positively. You have to be given the tools in which to think, or with which to think. And I think if you act as if you're a certain way, it's the actor or the action that causes the behavior change. So there's no question that by acting a role that you modify a behavior more than by thinking. So the acting does cause the thinking. And I think that since behavior is involved with emotions, with verbal communication, and with images, that you need to be a total actor I don't mean putting yourself on, in order for the behavior to change. And I think that you need to act a certain way
It's kind
before
of,
you behave.
I think Schuller refers to that as the ultimate faith, believing something before you can actually seeing it, and that's not being dishonest. It's just assuming that it's going to happen if you will act that way.
Well, another good example was people would say, well, aren't I kidding myself? Isn't it a lie? Isn't this a lie if I act as if I'm something I'm not? But if you look at it as a tool, the same thing as a hammer or a saw or a screwdriver or something that you fix something with, this acting is simply a tool or a role or a simulator. When I was working with the astronauts, I saw the perfect example of that. Here were a group of men who were acting weightless, but they were bobbing up and down in rubber life rafts. I mean, who was kidding who? They weren't on the moon. They weren't in outer space. They were out in the water, but they were pretending. Then they flew the lunar excursion module up and down off the desert. But that wasn't the moon's surface. That was just the desert. So it was a complete let's pretend. And they simulated and acted as if 300 times, and Neil Armstrong did it the best, the most, and he got the job to be shot 500,000 miles up and back because they acted it out in advance, but they simulated it perfectly. And they'd never done it before, so they weren't really doing it, so they were really putting themselves on, but with healthy, accurate information, so they had the right tools to work with, and it really works.
That's an excellent example, Dennis. I think this is what AA primarily is saying to the guy that's trying to recover from alcoholism. If you'll do these things, if you'll act these things, if you'll do them over a long enough period of time, you will get the results that we've gotten. At River Park, we feel strongly that recovery from alcoholism does require a complete change of living and lifestyle, a change of attitudes, concepts, and thinking toward family and friends, and above all, a complete change of how you, the alcoholic, feels about himself. Both Dr. Whately and Joe Foss talked on this. First, Joe Foss.
I see people around me all the time that have had drinking problems. And when they realize that it was a problem or is a problem to them and stop it, why they just move on into territory that they never realized was there before. Like I talked to a man this morning, sent him on his way, an old friend of mine, and he just got off the alcoholism kick a couple of years ago, and he said it's just brought him such a wonderful life since his wife had passed away, and he recently married again, and a lovely lady, and he looked 20 years younger than he did back when he was having the booze problem.
Is that a person need only to look at someone else who was in a worse position than they were, but who pulled themselves out. And so what I would offer to anyone who's feeling the blahs or really feeling depressed is that there's a story of someone who has done it and gone to great heights from a much more adverse position. You look at O.J. Simpson, who was a crippled boy with rickets in San Francisco ghettos, who had been arrested several times, wore leg braces, and everyone jeered him as being Orange Ball because he had a big head and little crooked legs, but he learned how to run with braces on, and his legs became stronger, and of course he runs through airports now. But I think the idea that no matter what you have, as long as you have some health and some idea that there's a change that you can make, a way for you to go, you really should look at other people's lives, and that's why it's so good to read stories of people who have made it out of very ordinary or bad circumstances. That really shows there's really a lot of potential.
So out of adversity can come more strength and perhaps a better life. We quote in treatment very often the Dr. I think Carl Menninger, who said that alcoholism, and I think this would probably apply to the other afflictions, it's the one illness that when you recover, you're weller than well.
That's a good way to put it.
I like that, because I've seen people who, when they will accept their problem, take the steps to do something about it, and then live it, their lives become so much fuller, so much better than it was before they ever got sick. And as you so well describe pursuing the history of people who have made the comeback, who have taken their adversity, and probably, like O.J. Simpson, he's become stronger because of it.
There are so many examples of that, Glenn. I mean, Wilma Rudolph, the great black woman sprinter, Althea Gibson, Golda Meir, old grandma with rolled-up hose, should be selling bagels at Macy's, led Israel, Anwar Sadat, in prison for 2 years, a peasant boy, leading Egypt, Begin, a Polish ghetto boy. Out of adversity comes greatness, and I don't think there's any adversity that anyone in this country is facing today, even alcoholism, which isn't really so bad. It's just a condition that we need to understand, recognize, and then get the information and have that habitual practice of the healthy other side with enough repetition to make it part of us, so that our self-image really becomes that. If the self-image changes, then the behavior automatically will follow.
Another chap that I was just talking with yesterday, I've managed to talk him out of getting into a senseless state for the last 2-3 months. And he was showing me yesterday how much he could pull up his belt. He lost some weight, and of course this man happens to be a very big businessman, deals in millions of dollars like I deal in nickels. Mm-hmm. And of course he always figures that he has pressures on him. And I've tried to get across the point to him that if he sits down on Monday night in our Bible class, and Sunday in church, and Sunday night in Bible class, that it'll take those pressures off his neck, that he won't have to be coming out of a hangover on Monday morning trying to find a way to back on the track.
Alcoholism can strike anyone in any walk of life. It is a disease, and although it can never be cured, it can be treated successfully. As we've talked today, we have said, first, recognize the problem. Realize that alcohol is the problem in your life. The second point is in changing your life, the behavioral change, the acting that Whately described. Then the question, how do I change? Fran Tarkington gives us this advice.
One there who has a problem with chemical dependency, seek help. If you know someone in your family or a loved one that needs help, be assertive enough to be willing to talk to them, confront them, and find them help. It's their only hope, and yours too.
And Joe Foss says, seek help in different words.
They are in trouble, whether it's a drug addict or an alcoholic or someone that's just worrying themselves to death. Mm-hmm. They have to realize that they are having a problem, and whether they sit down with people that can help them, whether they're doctors, professional people, or who they are, they have to realize, first of all, that they need help. And of course, talking about God, there's where they can get the help. He's with you all the time. He's with everyone. And if they're willing to accept that fact, they have a head start. And in fact, they are there already as far as recovery is concerned. But people, you know, in this day and age, we have so many folks that hear the word uptight, and so they just start concerning themselves about others being uptight, and as an end result, they themselves end up just as tense as you can get. And when it comes right down to it, you know, the average person is just as lovable as can be. I don't care, red, green, black, whatever the color, wherever they are, whether they have a lot of money or no money or someplace in between, they're great. And if they just realize how many great people there are at all levels, and that the average person is a good person. There's even, you know, there's some good in everyone.
When is the time to seek help? as Fran Tarkington advises? When is the time, as Joe Foss says, to ask for help? There's good in all of us, including the addicts to drugs and alcohol, and help is available. And to the family members, the friends, the ministers, priests, attorneys, and physicians, please realize that alcoholism is the problem and take more responsibility toward helping the alcoholic. Gary Moore tells a humorous yet sad story of his physician's attitude towards alcoholism. Then Dr. Whately reports on the attitudes that surrounded Wilbur Mills, attitudes that are all too common where alcoholism is concerned.
This way, that I have a family doctor who I just dearly love, and I trust. I take all my body work to him. I take my head work someplace else. I take my head work to my alcoholic friends. But this was a fellow who said to my wife. My wife said to him, "You know, we've got to do something about Gary." And he said, "Well, there's only one thing that we can do that'll really work, which is to, but he can't afford to do it." And my wife said, "What's that?" I said, "Send him to a rehabilitation center." And my wife said, "Why can't he afford to do that?" I said, "Well, think of his reputation."
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, he isn't doing his reputation a whole lot of good right now.
He's dying.
You know, staggering up and down the street. And it is better to be known as somebody who has a booze problem or an addictive problem and who's trying to do something about it than being known as a drunk in the house up on the top of the hill."
And you referred to, was it Wilbur Mills that made a similar?
Same thing with Wilbur Mills. Made a statement just last week on the Today Show when he was being interviewed that you'd think that a physician who knew he had a problem for 10 or 12 years that was getting headlines with all his antics going on, that somebody who knew him as a family physician would say, "Wilbur, don't you think it's time you did this or that?" But they didn't bring it up to him because they didn't want him, because he was a person in a high place, to feel stigmatized and to maybe have to take a treatment program and be away from his mainstream, and maybe they just didn't want to be the one to tell him because he was an outstanding...
He couldn't be an alcoholic. He's a
almost
star. President, right, yes. I think one of the biggest barriers we see in reaching the alcoholic is the image that the public has that so long as they're functioning, they can't be alcoholic. He's still got a job, he still has his family, he still has his profession, he could not be alcoholic. Do you run into that? This would be an example of it, of course.
It's one of the biggest misconceptions of all, is that I'm functioning properly, therefore I can't have a disease of any kind. It just isn't true. You know, if you're a habitual drinker, you are in some degree an alcoholic.
And it's progressive.
It's progressive.
We established that it's a leading illness, that it affects all levels, and of course the spin-off, it affects all the people around the alcoholic, which is a whole other area. Do you feel it's treatable?
I really do, Glenn. I think it is treatable because it's a habit, it's a behavior pattern, it's an illness, but it's treatable. And I think there's very encouraging progress being made all over the country to show that it is, and to show that people can change and become abstainers and very healthy non-alcoholics as a result of treatment.
What we're all saying is this: if you feel that alcohol is causing the trouble in your life, you can change it. At River Park, we can help. We provide the guidance for changes in living, the changes in attitude, the changes in the way you feel towards yourself. At River Park, just as we helped thousands of others, we can help you.
If you would like literature on the subject of alcoholism, or if you would like information on River Park, write to Glenn Jorgensen, River Park, Pierce, South Dakota. That's all the address you need.
If you are someone there who has a problem with chemical dependency, seek help. If you know someone in your family or a loved one that needs help, be assertive enough to be willing to talk to them, confront them, and find them help. It's their only hope, and yours too.